The River Otter Beaver Trial started in 2015, and it actually came about as a result of beavers living wild on the river already. And we're not quite sure where they came from, but they'd escaped or been released deliberately into the watercourse. And back in 2014, they were shown to be breeding, and the government were planning to round them up and remove them. And the local people, and including Devon Wildlife Trust, got involved in a campaign to try and have those beavers, left alone. And we proposed a trial to try and see what the impacts of beavers would be in a real-world agricultural landscape. And we were then granted that licence in 2015 to run a 5-year trial to study the impacts of the beavers on this river system and the people and the communities that live in the catchment. And that's essentially how it all started back in 2015. The trial then ran for 5 years and came to a conclusion in 2020. And at that point, the government made the decision, based on the evidence that we presented, that the beavers could remain in the wild. And this is the first reintroduction of a native mammal back into the English landscape, which is a pretty significant moment for nature conservation and for our rivers. At the beginning of the trial, we had 2 family groups living in the lower part of the catchment. They were down in the deep water around Ottery St Mary and Otterton, and they've spread really effectively from there, really now to cover most of the catchment. We've got 15 to 20 breeding family groups now within the catchment as a whole, right up into the headwaters up in Otter Head. And they've spread throughout some of the tributaries, and they really are thriving. The population has gone from strength to strength. And I think one of the reasons why the trial has been so successful is because we've been working with the landowners as they've colonised new areas of the catchment. We've been working with those landowners that have got beavers turning up on their land, explaining what they're doing, really just interpreting this new species that's back in the landscape again. Trying to alleviate any conflicts that arise, dealing with protecting trees that, for example, that the beavers are taking an interest in. So it's a whole range of work that we do, but that's really been one of the reasons why the beavers have been so well accepted within the catchment, I think. One of the concerns at the beginning of the project was that the beavers could be quite inbred. We had a very small founder population here, and the licence allowed us to introduce an additional 5 animals into the catchment over the course of the trial so that we could bring some new genetic material in. And that's exactly what happened. So we've brought animals into various parts of the catchment over the course of the project. And this is one of the sites where we've released a pair. We released a pair back in 2016 here, and they've thrived. They've done really well. They're actively breeding here. They've moved into the watercourse and have been managing the river, manipulating the river in all sorts of ways. It's been a really interesting sight to watch over the course of the 5 years now that they've been here. I think one of the reasons why the landowners have generally been so accepting of the beavers is the time that we've allocated to that side of it. We've now got a dedicated field officer who's out all the time, really, working with people that have got beavers turning up on their land, answering any questions, explaining what the beavers are doing, and helping to alleviate any problems that are occurring. So I think it's that time that's been dedicated to that side of the project that's made it so successful. Beavers are a keystone species. We call them a keystone species. Basically what that means is that they're bringing dynamism back into the watercourse, and the benefits or the engineering that they're doing is benefiting a whole range of other species. So for example, on these headwater streams, what they're doing is they're building dams. Sometimes the dams aren't permanent features, they come and go, but in doing so they're bringing that dynamism back into the watercourse that's been lost. So many of our streams have been dredged and straightened and deepened, and what beavers do is they raise the bed levels, they recreate meanders, and those meanders are then used by kingfishers, and the fish are coming back into the pools that they're creating. We've got spawning gravels for trout in the riffles that are being created as the dams wash out. I think the thing that we probably didn't really understand at the very beginning of the project was just how significant this animal is in terms of breathing life, real energy back into these watercourses. We've tamed our rivers and streams, and beavers are really helping to restore some of the species that we've lost as a result of that manipulation that we've done as humans over the years. One of the concerns that's been raised by some of the fishermen is that beaver dams impede the movement of migrating fish, particularly things like salmon and sea trout. What we're seeing, and what we've seen here on the River Otter, is that most of the dams are really built up in the headwaters. So they're built up in the smaller streams and the ditches, probably above where most of the salmon are migrating, probably in the areas where sea trout are coming up into. So in low flows, you would see that some of these dams may well prevent sea trout getting up into the higher reaches. But once the flows start to come down in the autumn, the fish are often able to migrate over the top of the dam, so we see them actually jumping some of these dams. But also the dams get washed out. They're not permanent features. They get washed out in the autumn rains. That allows the fish to then get past them up into the very smaller streams. And in doing so, they're providing the spawning habitats. As these dams wash out, you get these new gravel beds forming, and that's exactly where the trout are spawning. So it's a really complicated relationship, the one between beavers and fish, and clearly beavers have been living alongside these fish species for thousands and thousands of years quite happily. And as long as these watercourses are provided with space, we're giving the river the space to breathe and the space to be manipulated by the beavers, then I do think that the beavers are going to benefit these fish populations, that are in real trouble in some parts. So it's potentially a really good tool for restoring rivers and fish populations. And that's one of the reasons why in the States they've been bringing beavers back. It's the fisheries scientists that have been using beavers as a tool to restore rivers for fish spawning. The decision that the beavers could remain is really quite exciting. This is it's basically a huge amount of work for a lot of people that have got us to this stage. But we're now at a point where the government have to decide what next. Can beavers be reintroduced into other parts of the country? We've got projects being proposed all over the country, lots of enclosures where beavers are having to live within fences, and the government need to make a decision about whether the beavers are going to be reintroduced into lots of other rivers around the country, what sort of legal protection they'll give them, if any, and also what sort of financial support they're going to provide for landowners that are being impacted, and for basically giving landowners incentives to allow beavers to restore these rivers and to create wetlands, because they're providing a whole range of benefits to people and to society as a whole, in terms of biodiversity, but in terms of flood risk and a whole range of things that they're providing. So the landowners that are hosting the beavers and allowing their land to be, in some cases, re-wetted, they need some sort of financial incentive to do that. So these are all the things that the government need to make a decision on, and that's what we're anticipating over the next few months. It feels like we're going in the right direction, certainly. There's a huge enthusiasm for beavers, and the communities, certainly here in the River Otter, have really welcomed them and adapted really well to having them, and have benefited from them in all sorts of ways, financially and culturally and socially. So there's been a massive benefit to them being here, and I think the government are recognising that, and they're seeing the benefits that the beavers are providing, and I do think that the decisions are going to be made that will allow this species to return to all of our rivers over time. I think one of the main bits of advice that we would give to other areas that are hoping to bring beavers back is to provide lots of time for community engagement. The amount of walks and talks that we've done over the years has just been amazing. We've just been almost overwhelmed by the demand for information. Everybody wants us to come and talk to them. There's all sorts of articles that have been asked for over the years, and it's been a really important part of it. This is a species that we haven't had in this landscape for 400 or 500 years. We've forgotten what it is to live alongside this animal and what it does, you know. And so just providing that information is the most important part of having it back, you know. It's it's just part of the enthusiasm that you get from the communities is about, well, what's it doing? You know, why is it doing this? And you know, it's a really interesting aspect of it, and it probably applies to beavers more than anything else because they are these real engineers. You know, they are dramatically changing people's views of a landscape, and people want to understand what's happening and why.